Hello and welcome to episode 79 of Things I've Learned from Barry Harris. And today I thought would be a nice thing to talk about playing a 2-5-1. In this case we'll do C major, D minor 7, a G7, and all of Barry's scales of chords or things that you can use to play over that. But before we get started, I just wanted to mention two quick things. The first thing is I was interviewed by this really nice person, good musician named Josh Walsh, who has a YouTube channel called Jazz Library. I'll leave a link in the description. He's got some other musicians that he'd interviewed also. And it's a really nice thing that he's doing. He's trying to document a lot of different things. And this particular thing is obviously about Barry. So it was nice that he interviewed me. So I'll leave a link in the description about that. And also Thomas Eccles, who I often mention in this channel, Labyrinth of Limitations is his channel, and he's come out with an app that is extremely helpful and a really fantastic tool to work on all this stuff, all this Barry scales of chords, and it's completely centered basically around that. So it's a wonderful tool, and I think it's incredible. So you should go check that out also. I'll leave a link in the description for that also. So now, talking about in the key of C, let's say, and we're saying D minor 7 to G7, going to C major. Now we have a lot of different ways of looking at this, but the first thing we should discuss is D minor 7. Obviously, as Barry people, we don't see this as D minor 7. We see this as F6, which is beautiful just in and of itself. But also, what can we do for the G7? There's many scales of chords we can play for the G7. So the first scale, obviously the D minor 7 is F6 diminished. But then let's say we just went to G7. The G7 diminished scale works beautifully also. So if we said, really pretty. Instead of G7, let's do G7's tritone, which would be D flat 7. So let's do that. Also beautiful. So now we already have two. We have G7 diminished and D flat 7 diminished. Now we could also do D minor 7 to G7 flat 5 diminished, which is also D flat 7 flat 5 diminished, which works well. Let me do that one again. Also beautiful. We can do, let's do minor 6. So let's say D minor 7 to D minor 6. Or we'll do the same thing again. That's D minor 6 diminished to C. Let's do D flat 7's, the tritones minor, which is A flat minor 6. Let's hear what that sounds like. Also very beautiful. So I'm just doing drop 2s, starting with the D minor 7 here, the 5th fret. And then I'm trying to go to the closest drop 2 of any of the ones that I'm calling out. So I'm going closest G7, closest D flat 7, closest D flat 7 flat 5 or G flat 7 flat 5, closest D minor 6, closest A flat minor 6. So all these are wonderful. So now, there's a few others. Oh, you could just play plain diminished. But what's nice is seeing them in every inversion. So there's your F6. So the first one we did was G7. How about G7 flat 5? How about D flat 7? How about D minor 6? All these are 2/5s. How about F6 to, let's see, A flat minor 6? So now what's really cool about all these is, and what I think is fascinating about Barry's system, is that when you see a chord, it's not just the one specific stagnant chord. That specific chord belongs to a scale. So it belongs to a scale of chords, which means if I see D minor 7 on a piece of sheet music, and this is what Barry does incredibly fast and totally naturally, he immediately translates it into his scales of chords. So he sees D minor 7 as F6. So he knows all the things that he's practiced F6 he could use. Borrowing notes, thirds, contrary motion, and then the same thing when you choose one of the G7 things you do. So in this case, I chose A flat minor 6, but that means I can do A flat minor 6 going crazy with all this A flat minor 6 stuff, or it means I can do contrary motion, or it means I can do thirds. Anything for A flat minor 6 that I'm used to practicing, I can put in there. And then what's nice about it is the resolution. So think about that. So D minor 7 to G7, instead of thinking to yourself all these alterations and sharp 9 and flat 13 and all that stuff, all you have to think about is what different scales of chords can I use? Now what's really nice is, for instance, D minor 7. Now you've heard people play this before, and all this is somebody would probably say this was a flat 9 and raised 5, G7 flat 9 and raised 5, but it's not. Barry says it's A flat minor 6. Same notes, so it's not that it's not, but look what Barry can do. Because it comes from this. Or Barry can borrow some notes, so you can say, so Barry could do. See, now you can't do that if you're just thinking of this as a one stagnant chord. But if you're thinking of this as this comes from this scale, that means, oh man, I can do all my borrowing from the scale. So here's this, I'm going to borrow these 2 notes. Or I might even borrow 3, which is beautiful, or any of this stuff. So that is what knowing the scales of chords, as opposed to just knowing a stagnant chord with some numbers attached to it, does. That's the benefit of it. It gives you freedom to do anything you want. Look, if I did thirds, that was thirds for F6, then thirds for A flat minor 6. And I just made this little thing that, you know, it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it sure sounded pretty. And I'm telling you, I've never done that before. But it's just, I started thinking about things. You could think of it in tenths. And then, I mean, there are so many beautiful ways to look at it. So if you start looking at harmony and you decide for yourself, which is something I decided for myself, I am only going to think of it through Barry's scales of chords. That's it. I'm just going to think of it through Barry's scales of chords because I don't need anything else. So I'm not even going to worry about numbers, alterations, whatever. I'm going to choose what I want to use for them whenever I want. And those are primarily just on the 5 chord or dominant chord. You see all the different ways we came up with things to do. And interestingly enough, all the variations that we came up with, G7, the D flat 7, the D flat 7 flat 5, all those things, all these things, all these minor 6s and all, they all, well, at least all the dominants and all the minor 6s you see are all family. So for instance, if I took that D7, that D diminished, and I lowered one note, you're going to see all the 4 dominant family members. You're going to see G7, D flat 7, B flat 7, and you're going to see E7 from this. There's 1, there's G7, there's B flat 7, there's E7, and so on. So you see, this is what I mean. These are all connected. And then if you raise one note from the diminished, then you get this A flat minor 6. Here's the diminished again. Now you get D minor 6. If I go back to the diminished again, now you get F minor 6. If I go back to the diminished again, now you get B minor 6. It's all related. It's all family. There's no part of this that doesn't make sense. The whole thing makes sense. So I hope you, just from this small lesson, will see all of the variations that you can use using Barry scales of chords and their importance. And we didn't even get into really that much borrowing or all the other little things that you could do with the scale. But just think about that now. So if I said, if you see a piece of sheet music that says, oh, the song says D minor 7 and G7, think of all the variations that you can play on that. It's endless. And that you and I, or whoever is watching this, would know the same scales of chords, but yet we're all going to sound different. Every one of us will sound different on it. There'll be no more everybody sounding the same, especially guitar players, because that's a particular thing about guitar players. We all generally sound the same. So this will help us out of that. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Enjoy practicing your 2-5-1 using Barry scales of chords. And until next time, thanks again.